Well, hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be looking at negotiation skills. Just to tell you who I am, my name is Ian Corley and I work for Cambridge Assessment English based in Cambridge in the UK. And I am the Global Product Manager for BEC, the Business English Certificates. Just to remind you that those of you who've been attending sessions this week and last week, you'll be receiving a certificate of attendance. Thank you very much for coming to the sessions. And just to remind you that all my sessions are going to be recorded and you'll be able to watch them at your leisure. So without further ado, let's begin today's session. So first of all, I'd like you to think about when you say yes. And we've got some 5 different situations here, and let's look at them together. So sometimes we say yes when you are in complete agreement with somebody. So let's say that your friend and yourself have agreed that you're going to meet somewhere. You're both happy with the arrangements and you both say yes. Sometimes we say yes when we agree, but we might have some doubts. So it might be a situation, for example, where your tutor at school or university feels that you are ready to move up to a higher level of class, but you feel a little bit nervous about that. You don't feel very confident. So this would be an example of when you agree, but you have some doubts. You might say yes sometimes when you reluctantly agree. And this is when you really don't want to say yes, but you feel that you have to. It might be that a family member has asked you to do a chore. Maybe you've got to go and visit a relative or do some jobs around the house. You don't really want to do it, but you say yes and you agree to do it anyway. It might be that you say yes in appreciation of a suggestion or a solution. So it might be at work, for example, that a colleague has given you an idea about a way that you can solve a problem, and you agree, yeah, that's a good idea. Or we might say yes when you are speculating or thinking about what it might lead to. So maybe you've got a plan in place at school and you want to do something at the weekend. I'm not quite sure whether I'll have the time, but I'm going to say yes, and let's see whether it's possible to do it in the future. So really, when we can say yes in lots of different ways, and this slide was really to show you all of those different ways that we might say yes. But when we weigh up a situation and finally come to a solution or a state when we find ourselves saying yes, we have been involved in a negotiation. And that's what we're going to be finding out a lot more about today. So we negotiate all the time in our private lives as well as when we go to work. And I'd like you to think about some of the times when you negotiate. I'll give you some examples from my own experience. So I negotiate with my children all the time. It might be a negotiation about what time they go to bed. It might be a negotiation about doing their homework or eating their meal, but certainly I negotiate with them often. I also negotiate with my wife and other family members. It might be about some jobs that need doing in the house, or where if we're going to visit somewhere, something like that. We often negotiate when we go shopping. So if any of you shop in a market, you will be bargaining over the price of goods. You'll try and get the best price you can. This is a really good example of a negotiation. And you might also negotiate with your friends. I gave the example before about meeting friends at the weekend, or negotiating what you're going to go and see if you're going to go to the movies. These are all great examples of how we negotiate. And when and why do you need to negotiate in the workplace? We often negotiate a lot at work. In fact, we negotiate at work just as much as we do it at home, if not more. So often I negotiate with a customer or a client over a deal. It might be a negotiation around the terms of a contract between us, so checking the different clauses of the contract to make sure we agree. It might be to do with a payment. So the cost of goods, for example, we might negotiate the price, something like that. We also negotiate with our employers. It might be at a job interview, for example, where at the end of the interview, you ask about the salary, and maybe the company are interested in employing you, but you feel that you can get a little bit more money, and that would be a negotiation. And it might also be negotiation about workload. It might be your role within a team. It might be which jobs you do. And also, it might be something more simple. We often negotiate with our bosses about holidays and when we're able to take time off. So these are all good examples of how we can negotiate at work. So in today's presentation, we're going to learn more about negotiating, negotiation skills, the English, the types of English, the phrases we use for negotiating in English. And then I'm going to give you some information about the BEC qualifications at the end of today's session. So have a look at the words around the word negotiation. We've got agreement, discussion, disagreement, bargaining, buying, and selling. And all these elements make up negotiation. And whilst there may well be disagreements as part of the negotiation, what's really important is that when the negotiations are finished, the outcome is positive for both sides who have been discussing it. Negotiations where one side wins and the other side loses are not successful negotiations. And further down the line, there will be unhappiness, discontent, and maybe problems between the two parties. So it's really important that although there will be lots of discussion, lots of bargaining, some agreement, plenty of disagreement, it's really important that we have a positive outcome. And that's the only way that a negotiation can be successful. So we've got two different situations here, and let's look at them together. So we've got a landlord. A landlord is somebody who rents you a house or a flat, and it says, or a room, and it says, landlord, no late nights, no partying, no visitors, and I'd like the rent on the 1st of every month. So this landlord is quite strict. And the first student says, certainly, sir, please tell me when I can move in. And the second student says, well, okay, but in that case, I'd be unwilling to pay such a large deposit, and I'd like to be able to use the other entrance at all times. So this is a good example of how the first student hasn't really negotiated at all. They've just accepted all these rules and regulations that the landlord has given them. That might be okay, but you might find that later there are some things that you would actually like to do. And because you haven't had a negotiation with the landlord, you're going to have to accept his rules. Whereas the second person has thought about something that they would be able to get in return. And it might be that the deposit is something that they find difficult to pay. And so negotiating a smaller deposit is much better for them. And the reason I'm saying this is that when you're negotiating, you should always try to give away something which is not valuable to you, but could potentially be valuable to the other person, and try to ask for something back which is valuable for you, but may not be valuable for them. And that way you have a win-win situation. So potentially with this landlord, it might be that the rules of no late nights, no partying, and no visitors are actually more important to them than the size of the deposit. So we could see that this second student has really negotiated a good deal. Let's move on. So how is negotiating different from simply agreeing? Have a look at the cartoon here, because I think this is a really good example. So you can see the two people are talking and they seem very happy. And one person says, we should build a house. And the other person says, yes, I agree. But look at the images they have in their mind. The houses that they're thinking about building are very different. So when you agree with someone, you're really agreeing to their terms, the image that they have in their mind. But negotiating allows you to determine the outcome and to get more of what you want. And in this example, it would be really important for these two people to negotiate so that they could understand exactly what their vision is, what kind of house they want to buy. One of them wants a small one. One of them wants quite a big one. They'd have to compromise. They'd have to talk about the planning, how much money it will cost, how much time they have available in order to build this house. So that's why there's a big difference between negotiating and just simply agreeing. So here's a good definition of what negotiating is. Negotiating are discussions between parties who share, but also have, in order to arrive at an agreement. It has to be something that's mutually beneficial, something that both parties feel happy with. Has to be the same interest or some shared interest between the two parties in order for the negotiations to work. And they may well have separate goals, but through discussion, they're able to come to an outcome which is acceptable to both parties. So let's have a look at this in more detail. We've got discussion between parties who have some shared interests, but they might not have all of the interests together the same. They've also got separate goals. Okay, so I might want something different, but because some of the interests that I have are the same as the other person, it makes it easier for us to discuss this. And we're looking for a mutually beneficial agreement. Remember earlier when I said that a successful negotiation is just one where both parties feel positive, where there's a win-win situation. That means mutually beneficial. And if we don't have that win-win situation, the negotiations are not going to be successful, and further down the road, there's going to be problems. So let's have a look now at some of the important skills that we need to use when we are negotiating. So the first one is that we need to plan effectively. And this picture is really good because the idea of planning is that it's something you do with your colleagues and you have some kind of written document. It might be that you have an idea in your mind how you want the negotiations to go. So you might draw up a list of everything that we want, everything that we think the other person might want, where we are prepared to compromise, and where we're not prepared to compromise. And in having this plan, this would allow you to manage the negotiations much better, because often the other party might ask you a question that you've not thought of before, and you might not know how to answer it. But if you've planned effectively, then you will be able to answer difficult questions and you'll be ready for anything that might come up as part of the negotiation. So in addition to planning, we need to prepare. And so, as I mentioned, planning will often be something that you'll do in writing. You'll build up a strategy with your colleagues. And when you prepare, you'll sit down together, you'll talk, you'll discuss, you'll go through all those plans that you've put down together, and you'll work out whether you are able to reach the goals of the negotiation. Active listening. For any of you who came to my my session earlier in the week, you'll remember that I told you about the importance of active listening. Active listening means that when the other person is talking, you acknowledge what they're saying. It might be that you nod your head. It might be that you take some notes. But the idea here is that we're not just listening through one ear and the information is going out of the other. We're really listening to what the person is saying. We make them feel like we're really listening to what they're saying. And this will help us. Listening is just as important for communication as speaking. It's really important that we listen to the other person, and we can find out a lot of what they want by just listening to what they say. We have to be empathetic, and empathy means that we try to understand the other person's point of view. As you can imagine, this is really important for negotiating because, yes, we will have a view and we will know where we want negotiations to go. But in order to get to that goal, we also have to understand what the other side want as well. And it's really important that we try to cooperate with them. If we don't show empathy, then it's going to be much harder to negotiate. If the negotiations are friendly, polite, cordial, it's going to be much easier to negotiate with that person. And that's why empathy is so important. You have to be patient because negotiations can take a very long time and you're not going to be able to get what you want straight away. A good example of this is that you might be aware of Brexit. And Brexit is the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. Well, the British people voted to leave the European Union more than 3 years ago, but the negotiations are not complete. In fact, the negotiations for leaving the European Union are still in their very early stages after 3 years. It's quite incredible, but negotiations can take a very long time. You must be patient. You must bear in mind exactly what it is you want to gain, and you must keep your eye on the goal. Next one. Emotional control. It's really important. Just like empathy, it's really important that you're able to control yourself and to control your emotions during the negotiations. If the negotiations are tough, you might start to feel annoyed or angry or impatient. But it's really important that you don't show those emotions when you're negotiating. Because if you do, these are weapons that the other side could use against you. Let me give you an example. So when we get angry, we are not as rational as we are when we are calm. We can't think as clearly, and decisions might not come quickly to us. If you're able to remain calm, it gives a good impression to the other person. It helps the relationship. It builds empathy, and you will have a clear mind to deal with any questions that might come up. Emotional control is important in all aspects of our working life. Okay, it's never a good idea to become angry at work, to become annoyed with our colleagues. Even if you feel like that, it's much better to keep your emotions in check and to give a professional, friendly, communicative image to your workmates and colleagues. Trust is really important when we negotiate in anything that we do, because if you don't trust the other person or the other side that you're dealing with, it's going to make it very difficult for you to negotiate effectively. Because we said that a negotiation involves bargaining. You might have to give something up in order to receive something that you want. If you don't have this trust in place, how can you talk openly? So at the beginning of the negotiations, it's really important for both sides to trust each other and to spell this out, to say as part of negotiation, we have to trust each other to make this work, and that will help to create an environment where you can work together. Just like active listening is really important, good verbal communication is also extremely important. You need to be able to get your message across to make the other person understand. And this is really important because I found in my professional life that you might have an idea in your head and you might think that the other person has got the same idea as you. And it's very easy for you to just think, okay, great, they agree with me, let's carry on. And then you find out later that actually the idea that you had in your mind and the idea that they have in their mind are completely different. You thought there was agreement, but actually there isn't any. And so it's really important that you communicate well, you spell out your message, you make it clear at the start where your position is, what you would like, listen to them, and then you can start the open and calm negotiations. There are also going to be lots of problems as part of the negotiation. You might go in with a very clear plan of what it is you would like to get out of the negotiations, but it might become clear quickly that actually it's going to be more difficult to do that than you thought. There might be other issues that you haven't considered. The people that you're negotiating with might have more issues and problems than you realized. So problem solving is important. There's always a solution. You might not see it clearly at the beginning, but the idea is that working together, communicating, listening, having empathy, you can come to a solution. And more often than not, you might find that something that you thought was really difficult and really hard to solve, actually, the solution you come up with is really good and it makes you feel really happy. So problem solving is important. There are going to be problems. You're going to have to work through them. And the best way to do that is with a nice, open, communicative approach. Teamwork and collaboration. Well, I mentioned at the beginning of this section that we have to plan and prepare and practice what we're going to say. We're not going to be working alone. We're going to be working with our teammates. And it's important that we share ideas, listen to each other, use the experience of other people, use their help. They might have more knowledge than you. Together, we're always stronger than we are as individuals. And teamwork plays a really important role. It might be that one of you will deal with a certain part of the negotiations. Maybe one of you feels particularly strongly about dealing with the terms of a contract. Maybe one of you feels more comfortable talking about money. Maybe one of you is a much better communicator and is able to have that empathy with people. Find out what your key strengths are as a team and work to them. And you must also have a decision-making ability. So there will become a point in the negotiations when you have to decide yes or no. If you don't feel confident or if you haven't planned properly, you might be scared about taking a decision, especially if it's one that you hadn't planned for. However, it is important. You do have to make decisions. It might help if you've got a more senior member of your team with you, and they could help you with those decision-making things. But it is important that you understand that there will be a time during negotiation where you have to say yes or no. So we've looked at some of the key skills that you need when preparing for and undertaking negotiations. We've looked at how you plan, how you use empathy, how we listen actively, how the importance of communication, of trust, of teamwork. But there are two distinct strategies that you can use, and they are quite different. So let's take a few moments just to have a look at these. The first one is called social exchange theory. And the idea here is that we try to build a positive relationship with the other party, and we try to be as cooperative as possible. The other theory is quite different. This is called game theory. And in this one, relationships between the parties are competitive. So in the first one, where you might be using more empathetic skills, you might be more friendly, certainly more cooperative. In the second one, you might be more demanding. You might show exactly what you want, and it might be a harder negotiation, but it might be something that needs to happen. Of course, you can use both of these, and it's important that you're sensitive to when it's better to use one technique over the other. Some people do not react well to a competitive, hard negotiation. And sometimes it's not possible to have an open and cooperative relationship either. So we need to be sensitive to the two. Let's look at them in more detail. So let's have a look at this. It says, for several months, you have been negotiating the rental of your company offices for the coming year with the landlord. He or she has made some difficult demands, like high rent, for instance. The negotiations are taking up a lot of your time and you feel very frustrated. What do you do? Well, let's think about this from two different perspectives. If I was using the more cooperative approach, I would try to understand the position of the landlord. I'd have an open discussion with him to try to see if there are any of his demands that I could accommodate in order to help us to get that quick resolution. We might use those active listening techniques to hear their side of the story, to find out why the negotiations are taking long, to understand why the rent is so high, and to see if there's any room for maneuverability. If you're going to have a more competitive approach, however, you're going to be more determined. You're going to be to the point. You're going to be getting your message across first, and you're going to be giving the impression that there isn't any room for maneuver, and you may well be walking away from the negotiation. Both these techniques might work depending on the situation and depending on the landlord. Let's have a look now at some of the differences between cooperative language, which tries to make the situation lighter, to build up a relationship, to understand the other party, and competitive language, which is much more direct, gets you what you need, gets your message across quickly. Let's see how they can both work. So, looking at cooperative language to begin with, we'll often start by stating our position. And we'll say things, well, would you agree that it might be a good starting point if we were to? So you can see that I'm using quite polite language, quite respectful language. In the second one, we've said here, we would first like to explain where we stand on. And then you could, so again, we're giving our opinion. We'd first like to explain where you stand. So we want to find out what it is that the other person wants. And then leading on from that, we might do something else. And then the third one, what we are looking for is something, and we hope you will be able to. So if we take the example of the landlord with the high rent and the fact the negotiations have gone on for a long time, we could say something like, would you agree that a good starting point might be to discuss the rental every month? Okay, so you've made your point clear. We want to talk about the rent, and we've done it in a polite manner. Secondly, in the second example, we might say something like, we would first like to explain where we stand on the length of time it's taken for these negotiations. And then we'd be happy if you could explain your position around the size of the rent we will be expected to pay every month. Again, being quite clear, but the language is very positive. It's empathetic. You want to cooperate with the other person. And the third one, you could say something like, what we are looking for is a reduction in the rent. And we would hope you will be able to accommodate us in this. Again, the language that you're using is very polite. Now, if we were going to be stating our position and using language which is more competitive, I mentioned this is more direct language, you're going to be using your language that's quite different. So for example, you can see here, we're only interested in. Putting the only means that that's the one really important thing that we want to get across. We must talk about price first and only then about, so again, that's making it clear that the most important thing to me is the price. And after we've discussed the price, then we'll go on to talk about something else. The third one, we want to go straight to the question. Okay, we're being very direct in what we want. So if we take that example again of the landlord with the high rent, the first one you could say is, we're only interested in sorting out the cost of the property every month. Or you could say, we're only interested in finding a quick resolution to these negotiations that have been going on for a long time. Second one, it might be, we must talk about the price that you're asking for rent, and only after that will we talk about the terms of the contract. So you're stating your position quite clearly. The third one, we want to go straight to the question of the high rent. Okay, you're making it very clear that you're a determined person and this is the negotiation that you want to do. Now, as I said, we have to be a little bit careful because it really depends on the person that you're negotiating with. Some people will have a very negative feeling if you use this competitive language. Other people might think that you're a little bit weak and they're in a stronger position if you use that very cooperative language. So it's important that you read the situation, find out what works best. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other language that we should be using. So we've talked about stating our position at the beginning. Now, willingness to compromise. I mentioned that as part of a negotiation, you are going to have to compromise. You won't get your own way all of the time. And it's important that you understand that whatever compromise you make must be positive to both you and the other person in the negotiations. So, unfortunately, we can't lower the price, but we could consider. So you're saying, we're not able to do this, but we could offer you this. We might be able to if you were similar. Would you then be able to? Okay, another way of saying the same thing. We're prepared to, as long as you, so again. And let's put some words in this to make these examples come to life using the landlord with his high rent. So it could be, unfortunately, we can't lower the price. Well, actually, with the landlord, let's change it around and say, unfortunately, we can't pay more for the rent, but we could consider a higher deposit, or we could consider longer terms. So we can't pay more, but we could have a longer contract, or we can't pay more, but we could give you a bigger deposit. These are ways of getting round to compromise. Second one, we could say, we might be able to give you a larger deposit if you were willing to lower the rent. Okay, it's a good example. If we were able to extend the terms of the contract for 2 years, would you then be able to lower the monthly rent? Again, showing compromise. Or in the final one, if we were prepared to extend the terms of the contract, we would be prepared to extend the terms of the contract as long as you could lower the rent. So again, all examples have shown this balance, a willingness to give something in order to take something back. Well, with competitive language, it's more likely that you'll be unwilling to compromise. And then we would use language such as this. Unless you agree to, we will never accept. It's very strong. Why should we consider? Okay. And that's the only offer we're going to make. So if we use the example of the landlord, we could say, unless you agree to lower the rent, we will never accept the terms of your agreement. Now that's very strong, and you have to be prepared for the other person to say no. And if they're going to say no, you've got two options. You could either use some more cooperative language and try to solve the problem, or potentially you might have to walk away. Now, walking away from a negotiation is never a good thing, because I said we're always looking for a positive outcome for both parties. However, it might become apparent that it's not going to be possible for you to agree. And unfortunately, there are some times when you might need to walk away. Let's have a look at the second one. Why should we consider paying such a high rent when you will not consider giving us a smaller deposit, for example? And the third one, that's the only offer we're going to make, I'm afraid. And if you don't accept it, we would be prepared to walk away. That's putting extra pressure on the other party. If they really want to get the deal with you, then that pushing might make them accept. However, you're taking a risk there Because if they're not that interested, if there are other people who might want to rent the property out, then you have to be prepared to walk away there. Sometimes the style of negotiations is influenced not only by the cultural approach, but by the range of language that the two parties possess. This is really important. Now, the way that I negotiate on my day-to-day business might be different from the way that you do it because of differences in our cultures. But language is also really important. Sometimes a limited range of English can come across as competitive because it is very direct. Body language can be important in these situations. Eye contact, smiling, etc. So this is really important, that you have to bear in mind that if you're negotiating in English, and English is not your first language, and perhaps English is the other person's first language, what you say, the way that you communicate, might not come across in exactly the way that you would like it to. But by using positive body language, or if you want to be competitive, negative body language, you can get your message across. So for those of you who attended my webinars earlier in the week, we talked quite a lot about body language. Positive body language would be open arms, looking at the person in the eye, using your hands for expression, shaking hands in a positive way, smiling, nodding, listening actively. These are all examples of positive body language. The opposite, negative body language, would be perhaps standing with your hands on your hips or with your arms crossed, perhaps not looking in their eye, frowning, making noises like, as if you're impatient. Both can be effective, but bear in mind that if you want to be cooperative, and perhaps your English isn't as good as you would like it to be, you might have to use body language as well in order to get your message across. So we've looked at how you make an opening statement, and we've looked at your willingness and unwillingness to cooperate, and now we've got some language around rejecting an offer. It might be important for you to reject an offer, and it might make the other person think, and if they really want your business, they may well come back with a better offer. But as I said before, you do have to be prepared that if you reject an offer, they might walk away. Your discount seems rather low. I'm afraid we can't accept your offer. It's quite polite. You've stated your case here. Unfortunately, we're not able to. Again, you're keeping it polite, cooperative in the way that you talk. I'm sorry, we have decided this offer is not acceptable to us. Okay, so using our example again, the discount you've offered us on the rent seems rather low. I'm afraid we can't accept that offer. Would you be prepared to increase the discount by an additional 5%? That could work. That's very polite. Unfortunately, we're not able to accept your offer of a decrease in the deposit. However, if you were to lower the rent, we might be able to reconsider. I'm still trying to keep negotiations open. I'm still trying to keep it positive. And I'm sorry, but we've decided this offer is not acceptable for us. We would expect you to make a more positive offer next time you come back to us. So we're keeping that door open. We're giving them the opportunity to come back and to speak to us. Well, remember that if we're using that competitive language, it's going to be a much more direct and potentially seen as a more negative response. It's of no interest to us. It's quite strong language, okay? It's absolutely out of the question, okay? There's no way we're going to accept that. You'll have to do better than that, okay? Now, the reaction of the other person will really depend on how much they want your business, how much they want negotiation to work. These are very strong points. They could work really well. They could help to focus the mind of the other person, make them think that you're serious, and push the negotiations more quickly. They could work well, but equally, they might upset the other person. They might get angry. Maybe they don't care enough, and you could potentially have to walk away from the negotiation. Okay, so we've spent a little bit of time looking at some different skills around negotiation. We've talked about what negotiation is. We've talked about how we negotiate. We've talked about some of the important skills that we have to put in place, such as planning, teamwork, active listening, communication. Yeah. And then we've also looked at two different styles of negotiation. We've looked at both a cooperative approach and the type of open and polite language that's used. And we've looked at a more competitive approach, a more direct approach where you try and push the point. And we've looked at some of the different language that you can use. And becoming an effective negotiator does take time. It takes time, it takes practice, and it's important that you understand that you're not going to be great negotiators straight away. There'll be some bumps in the road along the way, and you might make some mistakes. But what's really important is that you learn from those mistakes and do a better job next time. So, all this week, I've been talking about the BEC certificates, the Business English certificates from Cambridge English. And I mentioned that I'm the global product manager. I'm responsible for this product all around the world. BEC is a great way that you can prove your business communication skills. And we're there to help you all along. Here you can see a fantastic BEC app, which has got lots of practice questions, activities, skills, and you can really learn how to improve your business communication. This BEC app has been created specifically for you in India by our office, and it's a really great resource. You can download it for free from the Apple or the Chrome shop. Do have a look. It's a really good app. So just to tell you a little bit more about what these business English qualifications are, they're ways that you can prove to an employer that you're able to communicate well using the English language in the workplace environment. They are in-depth assessments. They'll test your reading, writing, your listening, and your speaking skills. They're very communicative. All the tasks that you have to do, all the things that you have to write about, that you have to speak about, that you have to listen, are all based around important skills that you'll need to do when you're at work. Things like making presentations, preparing for meetings, writing reports, negotiating. Yeah, these are all things that we'll learn as part of the BEC exam. And the BEC exam has a speaking test where you will speak face-to-face with an examiner. And this is another great way that you can practice your English skills and talk with confidence. There are three levels to the exam. And we have something you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, this pre-A1, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. This is called the Common European Framework of Reference. And what this shows is what your language abilities are at a particular level in English. So you can see that the BEC exams are at B1, which is a kind of intermediate level. Somebody who's got a B1 level of English is able to communicate. They're able to listen and understand, take messages, write some short emails in English, do some reading. Then we've got B2, which is an upper intermediate level. You'll feel you're able to make presentations, to take part in sales calls, to read unfamiliar documents, to write longer pieces of work. And then we go all the way up to C1, which is an advanced level of English. Someone at this level would be able to communicate with a great deal of confidence using the language without any problem. But I've shown you this because it doesn't matter what your level of English is currently. We've got exams here that are at the right level for you, and you can take them and you can improve your skills, and they're all really valuable. So I mentioned that when you study for BEC, you also learn about some really important business skills, and I've tried to demonstrate these to you during the webinars I've given. So you'll learn about how to socialize and network at work, how to attend meetings, give presentations, write reports, improve your telephone skills, your problem-solving skills, how to negotiate, is what we've looked at today, and how to make decisions. These are all really important for your working life, and you'll learn about how to do these things whilst communicating using English. So I would recommend that you take Beck for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's going to build your English communication skills. You'll feel more confident about using English because you'll have that proof of your ability with the certificate that you get. Also, it's going to help you to enhance your CV. Think about it this way. If an employer is looking at 2 CVs, one person says they've got good communication skills and no proof, and the other person says they've got good communication skills and they have the details of their Beck certificate on there, the employer is going to be far more interested in the candidate who's got their Beck certificate because they've proved that they've got what it takes. And that's my next point. Studying for and taking an exam is difficult. It requires dedication. You've got to learn. You've got to put the time in. You've got to show that you've got the drive to succeed. And these are really important skills that you'll need to use in your working life. Also, if you take Beck, it's recognized by companies all over the world. More than 25,000 companies around the world recognize Beck. And many of those are based in India. So that means that when you take your Beck certificate to an employer, they're going to know what it is, and they're going to know that you've got proof there of your great English communication skills. Okay, the other thing that I would say, just before I finish, is that on our website, we've got lots of great free resources. So we mentioned the app there, which you should definitely download. It's really good and it's fun to use. But if you go to our Cambridge English India website, you'll find lots of other free resources that are available for the Beck exam as well. So we're here to help you, lots of resources to help you improve your English. Well, we've just got a few minutes left now, so I'm going to stop talking and thank you very much for listening to me. But if you do have any questions about negotiation skills or about anything that I've spoken about, please type them into the chat box and we'd be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ian. I think that's the 5th one in the last 2 weeks, but another brilliant presentation by you. I'm sure it's going to be very useful. I just saw the first question. How do you present the value you bring to the table when negotiating a deal?
Okay. Well, that's a really great question. So as I mentioned, you'll often in a negotiation, once you've introduced yourself to the other party and you're sat around the table, you both have to put on the table what it is that you would like to achieve from the negotiation. And I think it's really important that at the beginning, you make it clear what you would like. So you would say something like, thank you very much. It's great that we've had the opportunity to meet today and negotiate on this issue. There are a number of important points that we'd like to discuss. And I'm sure that there are a number of important points that you would like to discuss as well. Things that are most important for us are, and then you could list what they are, and you could give a little introduction. It might also be that before the negotiation, you send them an email and you put the points that you would like to discuss in that email, and you ask them to send you their points for discussion as well. And that way, that gives you time to prepare what it is that you would like to say.
Okay, I think another lovely question, Ian. I feel a bit sad, uneasy, and hesitant to negotiate. I feel like if I'm hurting them by negotiating, is it bad for me to be like this, especially when it comes to money matters? But I think it's a tricky question because in office, I don't think so we can tell our boss this.
Oh, it's a really, well,
what would your answer be?
It's a lovely question, Kevin. And I think first of all, I would say the person who's written that question, it seems to me that you have a really good and kind heart and you're a nice person. So that's a lovely thing to say. What I would say is that the idea of a negotiation is that you're not there to hurt the other person. Remember that a good negotiation is going to be a win-win negotiation. You have to leave happy, and that other person has to be happy as well. So that's the first thing, that you shouldn't feel that you're going to hurt them in any way. And also, it's really important to work out what's valuable for them and what's valuable for you. It might be that as part of the negotiation, you're able to give them something which you don't think is particularly valuable, but they actually really value it. And the same is true the other way around. So be fair, be clear, be honest, trust the other person, and remember that it's not just about you winning. You want both sides to be happy for the negotiation to work, and hopefully that will make you feel sort of less worried that you might be upsetting the other person when you have that negotiation. I hope that's helped to answer your question.
So I'm just seeing if there are any more questions here.
Yes. I can see one here, Kevin.
Yeah, if you want to take it on.
Yes, it says, while in interviews are a type of informal, sometimes, oh, sorry, hang on a minute here. While interview is a type of informal, sometimes how to remain formal in conversation to make it neither too much informal. Okay, so the question here is about how formal and informal should the discussions be, and it really depends on who you're negotiating with and what you are negotiating about. So, for example, if it's in a work situation and you'd like to take some holiday for whatever reason, and you want to talk to your boss about it, I would suggest that that would be a fairly informal negotiation. You might go off to a room together, or you might meet for a cup of coffee. You explain why you want to take the leave, make your position clear, and then listen to what the other person has to say. However, you might also have a much more formal negotiation when you're in a room with an important customer and perhaps your boss is with you. You have to act in a certain manner. What's important is for you to try and read the situation, be sensitive, never be informal when it's clearly a very formal meeting, and the same true the other way around. You might put your boss off if you're being very formal with him or her, when in fact all you want to do really is to ask if you can take a couple of days of holiday. So yeah, it's important for you to read the situation.
So Ian, how do we come across as being serious? So we don't want to be harsh, but at the end of the day, we want to be firm, and we want to also make the other person know that, you know, we are very firm with what we're offering. So how do you strike the right balance? What would you advise?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Kevin. So I think a lot of it is about your manner in the negotiation. So this, so for those of you who came to some of the earlier sessions, we talked about body language, about how we shake hands, etc. So you can have you would come into the negotiation with a very professional manner. You look confident, got strong body language, straight back, a good, firm, not overly firm, good, confident, firm handshake. You smile, you acknowledge them, you tell them who you are, and then you have to plan effectively. If you've got your notes in front of you, if you tell them, we're here today, this is what we're going to discuss, this is how much time we have available, these are the points that I would like to bring across, you're showing that you mean business. You're showing that you know what you want to talk about, you know why you're here, you've got your points, you know where you'd like the negotiation to go, you're being confident but friendly, and I think by having this approach, the negotiation will go well. What doesn't work well is if you are overly competitive. So if you come straight into the negotiation with lots of high demands, that isn't going to work. And at the same time, if you're really weak and just nod and say yes all the time, that isn't going to work either. So confident appearance, proper planning, know what you want to say, be pleasant, but not overly formal or not overly informal, and that will work.
Yeah, so another nice question, Ian. How to deal with difficult people who show less empathy?
Okay, so that will often happen, and you might have the other person who's trying to present themselves as a really hard negotiator. I think there's a few things that you can do. You could bring it up as part of the meeting. You could say, for example, thank you for making that point. I don't necessarily feel that we need to talk to each other in that way now. You know, we need to build a cooperative relationship. It might be that you say something like, This point seems to be one that's particularly difficult. I don't think we're going to find a solution today. Let's put that to one side and we'll come back to it later. Okay. You can try to ask them more questions, try to find out exactly why they've got this really negative approach. But if the negotiations are not going well, I think it might be an opportunity to say, let's pause the negotiations for today. Let's go away, think about what we're going to say, and we'll come back next week and negotiate again. And that might help to make the situation a little bit easier. I think it's not a good idea if they're being really tough. If you try and be even tougher, that might just escalate the problem, and it might end up in an argument. So try to understand the other person's point of view. Try to make the conversation more positive, less negative, but don't be weak. Don't give in, and be prepared to stop things, move away, and come back to the negotiation at a later date if things aren't working well for you.
Like I think, like what you said, Ian, in the presentation, I think it's about having that cooperative language rather than a competitive language. I think that's going to really help. We're going to move to the next question. It says, there are times when you feel that at the beginning of a negotiation, it's just not going to go anywhere. So should we just reject it at that time and just, close the deal and come out, or is it worth pursuing to the next level, or even attempting to do it?
It's a really good question, and I'll go back to that example that I gave of Brexit and a government trying to negotiate an exit from the European Union, which was really tough. Certainly, in these negotiations, both sides went in with a very good idea of what they wanted to achieve, and the problem was that, as I mentioned, negotiations have been going on for 3 years now. The problem was that at the beginning, neither side was prepared to give anything. That's not going to work. And if it becomes clear that there is no way out, you may well want to put the negotiations to one side and leave them for a point in the future. However, it's always worth seeing, is there a way round? Is there something more that we can do? How can we solve this problem? And you might also make it clear to the other person that at this point in time, we don't see a way forward. However, is there anything that you think that we might be able to do in order to get these negotiations moving again? And if it becomes clear that neither you nor they are able to come to a compromise, you may well have to walk away. But always try and find a solution, even if it looks difficult to start with.
So, Ian, there's another question, but I'm not going to ask you to answer it because you may get into trouble. It says, how to negotiate with parents when it comes to love. I don't think so. You want to go on that route today, but
that's a lovely. It's a lovely question to finish the day.
Question. Put in the right time, Ian.
All I would say is that if you want to gain love, you've got to give love. So if you can give your parents lots of love and make them happy, you're more likely to get it back again. So yeah, it's a two-way thing. Okay. Well, thanks very much.
I think we more or less. So, how will you negotiate with a non-empathetic person?
Well, I mean, it is difficult. You will find this situation, as I mentioned before. Just because they're not being empathetic, it shouldn't mean that you are not empathetic as well. Don't react to them. Keep calm. Carry on in the same way as you are. Be cooperative. Be empathetic, and it may well lead to them changing their approach as well. It might be that they might be nervous before they come into the room. They might have other issues, but I think it's important that just because they're not being like that, don't you be like them. Be yourself, be empathetic, be confident, and hopefully that will help to create a better environment.
Yeah, I think thank you, Ian, so much for that. I think we have come to an end. But before we end this, I think many of you have been asking for your certificates from the previous session. You'll definitely get that. As I shared in the previous webinar, we've been swamped with a lot of these webinars, so it's taking us some time. But don't worry, you will get your certificate of participation. So, in case if you want to drop us an email, if you don't get it by next week, the email address is on your screen. Enquiries at cambridgeenglish.in. Many of you have been asking about watching the replay. You will get a replay automatically on your email ID to watch this webinar once again. I think so. That's definitely going to come in. We would like to hear some feedback from you about all these webinars. So there is a link on SurveyMonkey that I'm just dropping in on the chat box. So if you can send us your feedback would be good. Once again, just to share with you, if you've attended the entire webinar, for all the webinars, you will get your certificate. So that will your participation certificate will come in. If there are any queries you want to work with Cambridge Assessment English, you want to offer back in your college, in your university, do drop us an email at enquiries at cambridgeenglish.in, and one of us will respond to you. But thank you so much, Ian. Really appreciate you. I mean, 5 webinars in the last 2 weeks, and I think you've
Pleasure.
been taking it from home. It's been so seamless, and it's been so amazing to have you, Ian, with us. I think the enthusiasm, the way you went through with all the webinars, I think the feedback has been overwhelming and very, very positive. Thank you so much, everybody, for your feedback. I think many of you, were giving us a lot of good feedback, saying that it was an amazing session. So thank you so much. We really value your time during this time to spend to learn a new skill, to learn about something new. I'm sure many of you may be wanting to know more details about Beck, how you can offer this at your institution. The Beck app is a fantastic app, so you could go ahead and you could download the app. So thank you, Ian, once again, and I'm sure
Thank you.
in some time we may have you again as maybe some other repeat sessions.
Be my
But
pleasure.
thank you, Ian,
Yeah.
once again.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody. And thanks, everyone, for attending. Thank you.
yeah. Bye bye. Bye bye. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Really appreciate your time, your effort. Just to share again, our sincere apologies for not sending out the certificates in time, but we will do it by next week. You'll definitely get it. If you don't get it, do drop us an email at enquiries at cambridgeenglish.in. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate that you have benefited from these workshops. From the 5 workshops, we'll try to get the links up on our on our website, on the YouTube page, and hopefully you can view it and you can show your students. Or if you want us to have another webinar for your institution, do drop us an email and we'll get in touch with you again. So thank you. Stay safe, everybody. And thank you once again for joining us. Bye-bye.